Super Mario 64 was released in 1996 for the Nintendo 64. As everybody knows, this is Mario's first 3D platformer game and one of the first 3D video games ever developed. The opening to this game is very short compared to the other Mario games that followed, as it starts with just a simple letter from Peach before panning over the starting area, over to a pipe that Mario jumps out of. The introduction to Mario's moveset in this game is absolutely brilliant because the outside of Peach's castle has nothing even remotely dangerous to Mario, such as bottomless pits and enemies. The player is given free reign of Mario and his controls with no harm present in the environment, and the player is allowed to stay there for as long as they want before choosing to enter Peach's castle. As soon as you enter the castle, there is a brief message from Bowser, but nothing else, restraining the player from continuing. Right away, it will be noticed that all the doors but one have a star with a number written inside it, indicating how many power stars are required to enter that area of the castle. Therefore, once the player sees the one door without a number written on it, they will enter that door and find the painting to the first official level within the game, Bob-omb Battlefield. This level is relatively tame, with little amounts of harmful enemies placed in the way. However, I will say it's quite odd how Nintendo chose to place the most deadly enemy into the first level, that being the Chain Chomp. This enemy is completely invincible, and the player is required to move fast in order to evade its attacks. Anyways, the journey up to the first Power Star is pretty linear, as it sees Mario running up a hill on very narrow paths. Once you reach the top of the hill, King Bob-omb is introduced, and while it may have seemed weird to place a boss fight in the first level of the game, it actually serves a great purpose in helping the player adjust to the new way some enemies are handled in a 3D environment, while also helping them prepare for the Bowser fights without even recognizing it at the time of fighting King Bob-omb. Once reaching the star titled Mario Wings to the Sky, the player will come to realize they cannot complete it until they unlock one of the game's 3 secret caps. This provides great mystery to the game and gives incentive to more thoroughly explore the levels in Peach's castle in order to find the key needed to complete these certain stages. Once the first star in Bob-omb Battlefield is collected, Mario is thrusted out of the painting and immediately receives a message explaining how more doors within the castle can be opened. This allows the player to be much more flexible in how they approach completion of the game, if they choose. For example, if someone enjoys a specific stage more than another, they might want to collect all the stars within the stage they like in order to rack up enough stars to completely ignore the level they dislike, which gives them the option to unlock an entirely new stage with the stars they collected from the levels they previously enjoyed. This is quite a brilliant system because it provides great replayability and also gives motivation to the player because they know they can skip a stage they strongly dislike, simply by collecting enough power stars in other levels of the game. After collecting the first star of the game, the option to enter the stage, Whomp's Fortress, is made accessible. This level poses the first threat of a bottomless pit in the game, which adds progressional tension to the player. Realizing that they can lose a life simply by falling off the map trains them to control Mario more carefully throughout the stage, prepping them for what's to come later on in the game. This level also contains a boss fight, however, it is fought in an entirely different way than King Bob-omb. Rather than running behind King Whomp like you did with the Bob-omb, you now have to ground pound on his back once he slams to the floor. This also gets the player accustomed to this move and shows them how it can be used on most other enemies within the game. Jolly Roger Bay is the first water level in the game, and while I think it is a fine level with a gorgeous soundtrack, controlling Mario underwater isn't all too special this time around. The movement can be clunky and frustrating, and it can be difficult to grasp the controls of different speeds that Mario can travel at while underwater. Therefore, the water levels in this game are not very enjoyable, at least from a gameplay point of view. This is especially relevant to the other main water-themed stage, Dire Docks. There is almost no land for the player to run around on here, as immediately upon entering the level, Mario is dropped straight into a large body of water, where the various tasks must be completed. Overall, Dire Docks feels like a completely unnecessary addition to the game, and feels like it was only added in order to give the game exactly 15 stages. Collecting stars is usually done in a pretty unique way each time, however, there are an abundance of them which must be completed in very similar ways to other stars within the game. For example, there are numerous times when in order to receive a star, the player must race Koopa the Quick, maneuver down a long slide, or open treasure chests in a completely random order. That last example in particular can get extremely tedious over time due to the fact that there is no way of finding out the order in which Mario needs to touch these chests to uncover the star, as it is only a matter of trial and error. One big difference between Mario 64 and the previous 2D entries is the use of power-ups this time around. Unlike the 2D games, in Super Mario 64 there are no question mark blocks that contain the usual items such as the Fire Flower or Star Power. Instead, there are 3 different types of caps Mario must wear throughout the game in order to achieve the numerous power stars that require the use of these caps to obtain. These caps include the Wing Cap, the Vanish Cap, and Metal Cap. However, the player is not given direct access to any of these and must find a large button to step on in order to activate that button's respective cap. The Wing Cap serves as Mario's way of traversing the skies, but it controls in a very awkward and clunky way. Although I will say getting the hang of it, while tricky, is also incredibly rewarding when done right. The Vanish Cap turns Mario invincible and grants him access to secret passageways hidden within certain walls. In all honesty, while this cap does a fine job at giving Mario more extensions to his moveset, I think it has some missed potential due to how little it is used. Lastly, the Metal Cap allows Mario to run right through enemies while destroying them in the process. It also forces Mario to sink to the very bottom of any water he is standing in. This power-up is pretty limited in its use throughout the game, and I will say it would have been cool if there were more levels where the player could combine these caps in order to obtain a certain power star. This is actually put in practice, but only once in the entire game. The example of this is in Dire Dire Docks, where the player must collect both the Vanish and Metal Cap in order to sink to the bottom of the lake and run through a closed-off gate in order to grab the star. This puts the function of both of these caps into great use, and it would have been cool to see other challenges like this within the game. The enemies in Mario 64 are often very basic and easy to defeat, which was a smart move on Nintendo's part because as the first ever 3D Mario game, it would have been extremely frustrating for players to learn more complicated enemies, patterns, and movesets in order to defeat them. As it stands, most can be destroyed with just a simple jump, ground pound, or punch. While some enemies such as the Big Eyes or Snowmen can be defeated by simply running around them and requires no contact between Mario and the target. The graphics of Super Mario 64 were incredibly impressive and jaw-dropping for the time, but honestly do not hold up well today. However, I won't be too hard on them because as one of the first 3D games ever created, Nintendo did a great job at translating the goofy designs of the levels and enemies of the 2D Mario games into a big, expansive 3D environment. Mario 64 definitely still holds the same amount of charm as the earlier games, with perhaps even more due to the addition of voice acting for Mario this time around. With the introduction of the Nintendo 64, loads of new hardware updates and improvements could be made from the previous console, that being the Super Nintendo. Therefore, voice acting was implemented for Mario, performed by Charles Martinet. He does a great job at bringing even more life and joy to Mario than he already had. It's hard not to smile sometimes while listening to Mario make silly noises while jumping around all over the place. With technological advances also came improvements to music quality. With the Nintendo 64, the team could actually use MIDI samples rather than 8 or 16-bit music. This helps open up the world of Mario 64 even more and adds more attention to specific stages, while creating a more lighthearted tone in other levels. The soundtrack in this game is pretty great, as it normally is for Mario games. However, I would say the one drawback is how repeated many of these tracks are. For example, the theme heard in Bob-omb Battlefield is also used in Tall Tall Mountain, Tiny Huge Island, and Whomp's Fortress. While these themes are all nice, it would have only benefited the game to have at least one more unique theme present. One thing Mario 64 does better than the other 3D Mario games is its emphasis on secrets. This game is packed full of intriguing mysteries and interesting things to find. For example, in order to discover the Wing Cap, the player must notice a light shining down into the entrance of Peach's castle, and go into first-person mode, then look up at the light. This brings them into a totally unique stage where the button to unlock the Wing Cap across all stages is revealed. It's secrets like these that give Mario 64 such a unique reputation and vibe compared to other games. People to this day still love talking about the many oddities and secrets found throughout the world. Next, I want to talk about the Bowser stages, because these differ greatly from the 15 main stages. Rather than being an open sandbox for the player to explore like the other stages, the 3 Bowser levels are incredibly linear and test the player more on their raw platforming skills. Obstacles in these stages are much more difficult to get past, and I think it was a great idea to create these levels this way. They actually feel like a build-up to something big due to their dramatic and unique music pieces, combined with their emphasis on sheer platforming. That brings me to the actual fights with Bowser himself. As mentioned earlier, defeating Bowser is similar to destroying King Bob-omb from the first stage of the game. It was genius to start the game out that way because not only got the player accustomed to the new 3D controls, but it simultaneously prepared them for the Bowser fights within the game. Just like with King Bob-omb, Mario must run behind Bowser and grab him, only rather than throwing him immediately, he must be spun around until enough speed is reached to hurl him into a bomb, thus ending the fight, or 3 bombs in the case of the final fight. My last main topic is going to be on the 100 coin stars, as these are very controversial within the community. In order to achieve 100% completion, 100 coins per main level in the game must be collected. This is a generally good way to get the player moving around the stages and exploring aspects of the game they might have not otherwise encountered. However, this is not put into good practice once stages such as Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride are attempted, as Rainbow Ride in particular is incredibly linear. Therefore, collecting 100 coins can be a completely arduous task due to the fact that if you glide past enough of these coins needed for the Power Star, any chance of obtaining all 100 coins is completely lost, which makes the player have to completely restart and ride through portions of the stage they have already gone through numerous times to collect the previous stars. Super Mario 64 was a revolutionary game in every sense of the word, but you don't need me to tell you that. Just look at how other games were developed and how they took many aspects of Mario 64 and implemented them into their own gameplay and structure. Games such as Banjo-Kazooie. Almost every 3D platforming game on the Nintendo 64 drew heavy inspiration from Mario 64, and I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that without this title, the gaming industry would not be the way it is today. It left millions of people with warm and fond memories that they will always look back on with high regard. Super Mario 64 is truly an innovative classic in every possible way, and it succeeded on everything it set out to do.